Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Literary Lore. Today, on Halloween, we're continuing our series on Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, specifically chapters 7 through 11. Like most literary works we'll be covering on this channel, it is in the public domain and easily accessible for free with a quick search. I have included a link to the novel in the description. We've got big spoilers coming up for a couple 100-year-old story, so if you want to avoid that, I suggest catching up before you continue. So, it's been 2 years since Frankenstein's fiendish lapse in judgment. Victor and the ever-lovable Henry have just returned from the romantic jaunt through the mountains and discover a new letter, this time from his father. My dear Victor, you have probably waited impatiently for a letter to fix the date of your return to us, and I was at first tempted to write only a few lines, merely mentioning the day on which I should expect you. But that would be a cruel kindness, and I dared not do it. What would be your surprise, my son, when you expected a happy and glad welcome to behold, on the contrary, tears and wretchedness? And how, Victor, can I relate our misfortune? Absence cannot have rendered you callous to our joys and griefs. And how shall I inflict pain on my long-absent son? I wish to prepare you for the woeful news, but I know it is impossible. Even now your eye skims over the page to seek the words which are to convey to you the horrible tidings. William is dead. That sweet child whose smiles delighted and warmed my heart, who was so gentle, yet so gay. Victor, he is murdered. Victor's father goes on to recount what they know. Essentially, William went off into the forest and he was found strangled to death, the killer's thumbprint bruised onto his neck. Elizabeth blames herself because she had given a locket to William that was now missing, presumably stolen by the murderer. It is a key piece of evidence that could help identify the killer. So Victor and Henry immediately leave to investigate. What follows is a bit of dramatic irony and traditional suspense. We know that something is up. Narratively, this death must have something to do with Victor's creation, but how did it wind up all the way in Geneva? Is the entirety of his family in danger? Did the creature actually take the locket? These are kind of questions that would be rattling in the 1800s mind of the reader. They arrive at night and have to wait for morning to enter Geneva. Victor takes the opportunity to investigate the site of William's murder. So he goes off into the forest, and even in this horrifying situation during a grim thunderstorm in the night, Victor still admires the beauty of nature. It is during this dark and stormy night that he sees a figure among the trees. A flash of lightning illuminated the object and discovered its shape plainly to me, its gigantic stature, and the deformity of its aspect more hideous than belongs to humanity. Instantly informed me that it was the wretch, the filthy demon to whom I had given life. Naturally, Victor is certain his creation is the culprit. This creates a question, though. Who is responsible for his brother's death? Is it the monster that choked him out, or the creator for having given the creature life? Is the creature given any leniency on account of intelligence? Because it's possible it didn't even realize what it was doing. Either way, Victor returns home, and he speaks to Ernest, who fills him in on the family's continued misery and the news that the culprit of William's murder has been apprehended. The murderer discovered? Good God! How can that be? Who could attempt to pursue him? It is impossible. One might as well try to overtake the winds, or confine a mountain stream with straw. I saw him too. He was free last night. I do not know what you mean, replied my brother in accents of wonder. But to us, the discovery we have made completes our misery. No one will believe it at first, and even now Elizabeth will not be convinced, notwithstanding all the evidence. Indeed, who would credit that Justine Moritz, who was so amiable and fond of all the family, could suddenly become so capable of so frightful, so appalling a crime? So dear Justine is the killer. Right. Victor knows the truth. But how can he possibly approach the situation? Justine somehow has the locket, tying her to the murder, and she's been sick in bed since that murder occurred. She's about to be tried that very day. Fortunately, Victor's here. He has all the answers. He can save her. Right? I was firmly convinced in my own mind that Justine, and indeed every human being, was guiltless of this murder. I had no fear, therefore, that any circumstantial evidence could be brought forward strong enough to convict her. My tale was not one to announce publicly. Its astounding horror would be looked upon as madness by the vulgar. Did any one indeed exist except I, the Creator, who would believe, unless his senses convinced him, in the existence of the living monument of presumption and rash ignorance which I had let loose upon the world? So Elizabeth thinks Victor can save Justine, but as we just read, he isn't exactly inclined to admit his hand in the matter. Now, he gave us a decent reason for his silence. But remember, we can't quite trust Victor's account. He's full of himself. He's got big main character energy. So naturally, he's a victim in all of this, right? It's not like he knows about a monstrous entity that could at the very least stall Justine's execution. So verbal irony happens when a character says something that doesn't fit with reality. Like, what I just said was ironic because of all the sarcasm. What Victor said was also ironic. While he may not have been lying exactly, his understatement of the situation and his impact on events was pretty obvious. Unfortunately, the Frankenstein family naively believes that the justice system will deliver justice. Now, Victor is sure to let Walton know that he is suffering terribly and that he blames himself for what transpired. He even reiterates, 1,000 times rather would I have confessed myself guilty of the crime ascribed to Justine. But I was absent when it was committed, and such a declaration would have been considered as the ravings of a madman, and would not have exculpated her who suffered through me. So a series of witnesses come in, they give incomplete circumstantial testimony that vaguely ties her to the murder. We, alongside Victor, know she must be innocent, but the court is more concerned with finding someone to punish. Several witnesses were called who had known her for many years, and they spoke well of her, but fear and hatred of the crime of which they supposed her guilty rendered them timorous and unwilling to come forward. Elizabeth saw even this last resource, her excellent dispositions and irreproachable conduct, about to fail the accused, when, although violently agitated, she desired permission to address the court. So Elizabeth steps up and speaks to the court, defending Justine bravely. But the moment she's done, her words are forgotten by the fervent crowd, and, you'd think that her connection to William, being a family member, would have made it to where all of her points would have had more strength. But she doesn't have as much of an impact as, someone like Victor. Speaking of which, let's see what he has to say. I could not sustain the horror of my situation, and when I perceived that the popular voice and the countenances of the judges had already condemned my unhappy victim, I rushed out of the court in agony. The tortures of the accused did not equal mine. She was sustained by innocence, but the fangs of remorse tore my bosom and would not forego their hold. So yeah, I'm just going to read this one real quick again, that last part that I just said. The tortures of the accused did not equal mine. She was sustained by innocence, but the fangs of remorse tore my bosom and would not forego their hold. This piece of trash sees an innocent woman accused of atrocities he knew she would never do, and has the audacity to say he's the real victim here. When I first read this story, that line stood out as the strongest portrait of Victor's heart. No matter what he says, no matter how beautiful the words, he truly believes that he is the victim. Regardless of the falsehoods he drops down, he thinks he's telling the truth. He thinks what he says is real. This victim mindset taints everything he does, and as the story progresses, we should note how that perception of himself influences his actions. We've seen several times that he tends to prescribe the horrible events around him to fate and destiny. So really just be mindful of that aspect. Soon after, Justine confesses to the murder under duress and acquiesces to her fate. Victor and Elizabeth stay with Justine until it's time for her to be executed. All the while, Victor is racked with guilt over his creation's actions. Chapter 9 rolls around, Justine's been executed, and we get a short reprieve from the plot. The Frankensteins go on a vacation in the mountains to try and get rid of the despair they find themselves in. Even though Victor considered himself responsible for the murder of 2 innocent people, he finds the hike lifts his spirits somewhat. Now, for those that remember, this seemingly pointless chapter has a few purposes. The main one I'd like to point out is the romantic ideals of nature that have this healing power. But also, it increases suspense. You see, the 1800s reader knows the creature is out in the wilderness and seems to have some level of intelligence. This is the same anticipation that a modern horror film employs when you see a character wandering through the woods, when you know the killer is out there. So chapter 10 seems to continue the hike, with Victor still describing all the beauty around him, but then it starts to rain. And after the storm dissipates, he's climbing this glacier, which, you know, who hasn't? He reaches the top of the glaciers around noon, and now he sees the crisp white and blue landscape before him, and it's a beautiful sight. I suddenly beheld the figure of a man at some distance, advancing towards me with superhuman speed. He bounded over the crevices in the ice, among which I had walked with caution. His stature, also as he approached, seemed to exceed that of man. I was troubled. A mist came over my eyes, and I felt a faintness seize me. But I was quickly restored by the cold gale of the mountains. I perceived, as the shape came nearer, sight tremendous and abhorred, that it was the wretch whom I had created. So he tears up. He's like, oh, no. But then he says, okay, you know what? No, I'm going to fight this thing because this is my creation. It's my problem. So Victor squares up. He's ready to fight his creation. You know, this thing that's huge. Somehow he doesn't seem to remember that he created this giant corpse construct with super strength. Devil, I exclaimed, do you dare approach me? And do not you fear the fierce vengeance of my arm rigged on your miserable head? Begone, vile insect, or rather stay, that I may trample you to dust. And oh, that I could, with the extinction of your miserable existence, restore those victims who you have so diabolically murdered. So you have your image of the creature in your mind. You can imagine how it must loom over him. That Victor, for all of his bluster, is dwarfed by his creation. So I'll just read what happens next. I expected this reception, said the demon. All men hate the wretched. How then must I be hated? Who am miserable, beyond all living things. Yet you, my creator, detest and spurn me, thy creature, to whom thou art bound by ties only dissoluble by the annihilation of one of us. You purpose to kill me. How dare you sport thus with life? Do your duty towards me, and I will do mine towards you and the rest of mankind. If you will comply with my conditions, I will leave them and you at peace. But if you refuse, I will glut the maw of death until it be satiated with the blood of your remaining friends. So the creature can speak. He technically has a French accent and he uses his archaic English to speak, but I'll explain that bit later. But yeah, he's not all, ha, ha, put number rats. Instead, he's this creature that is fully capable of thought and action. By the way, if you got that reference, mention it in the comment, please. While this may be a surprise to some in the modern day, it was no less of a revelation for the 1800s reader. Prior to this, the only hint of the creature's intelligence was that it was seen on a sled at the beginning in Walton's letters. So this well-spoken monster seeks discourse with his creator. Naturally, Victor yells at him and lunges. He misses entirely, and the monster continues. Be calm. I entreat you to hear me before you give vent to your hatred on my devoted head. Have I not suffered enough, that you seek to increase my misery? Life, although it may only be an accumulation of anguish, is dear to me, and I will defend it. Remember, thou hast made me more powerful than thyself. My height is superior to thine, my joints more supple. But I will not be tempted to set myself in opposition to thee. I am thy creature, and I will be even mild and docile to my natural lord and king, if thou wilt also perform thy part, though which thou owest me. O Frankenstein, be not equitable to every other, and trample upon me alone, to whom thy justice and even thy clemency and affection is most due. Remember that I am thy creature. I ought to be thy Adam, but I am rather the fallen angel, whom thou drivest from joy for no misdeed. Everywhere I see bliss, from which I alone am irrevocably excluded. I was benevolent and good. Misery made me a fiend. Make me happy, and I shall again be virtuous. So a few things. For some reason, the creature is speaking to Victor reverently. He seems to understand the concept of God and Adam. He also mentions the fallen angel, the Shaitan. So we have a series of identities and relationships presented. This is an evolution of the theme introduced prior, where Victor wanted to be equal to God. He was successful. He created something. And now he's been given the responsibilities associated with it. The creature is essentially praying to him, though for what, we can't yet be sure. The intelligence in the creature and their dialogue also gives us a general idea that he probably definitely killed William. But here, he tries to petition Victor, telling him that he's really a good guy, and that his loneliness has made him a fiend. By the end of the chapter, the monster has convinced Victor to join him in his cave to recount what has transpired over the 2 years since his birth. So the 1800s reader trying to decipher events may think that the creature was just this hyper-intelligent being due to having an adult brain in its unhallowed head. But the start of chapter 11 paints a picture of confusion. If anything, the monster has the faculties of a newborn whose senses are bombarded all at once. He describes the overwhelming initial days, a hazy recollection involving him stealing Victor's coat and living in the forest. After the first few days, his senses begin to coalesce and he is struck by the beauty of the world around him. An interesting note here, one that will become more pronounced as the story progresses, is that he finds comfort in the romantic ideal of nature, despite himself being an artificial creation. You know, an artificial intelligence, if you will. After deciphering how night and day works, the creature determines that he really doesn't like cold, and he discovers fire. And, well, before we look at his interaction with fire, there are a few important notes here. The first, as you've noticed, is that we are following the creature's point of view now. His perception of the world is considerably more innocent, though, of course, still dramatic. This also shows the audience that the creature is not an inherently evil creature. Ugly, definitely, but not malignant. The next point is a question presented by these observations. The creature's life or undeath is evident, but what commentary can be derived about the soul? Is he this hollow husk, a void within that has no avenue of redemption? Or is he just this massive infant in need of a father? Did the installation of life result in the distillation of a unique consciousness worthy of acknowledgement? This, of course, creates further wrinkles from a spiritual perspective. If this creature is worthy of a soul, was it given that distinction when it became cognizant of its existence, or was it the spark of life that birthed into the world? Perhaps the mere conception of the idea within Victor's mind would confer such designation of life. Furthermore, if the creature is more than a beast, not a simple simulacrum, but a real boy. Would William still be alive if the creature had been given actual guidance? And regardless of the creature's ability to house a soul or morals, we return to the moment in the story where he discovers fire. Now, to reiterate, fire is a symbol for knowledge, enlightenment. One day, when I was oppressed by cold, I found a fire which had been left by some wandering beggars, and was overcome with delight at the warmth I experienced from it. In my joy, I thrust my hand into the living embers, but quickly drew it out again with a cry of pain. How strange, I thought, that the same cause should produce such opposite effects. Unlike classic depictions of the monster, which by now you should hopefully have recognized shared very little beyond their origins with the creature, he does not fear fire. It still hurts him, but it's something he's fascinated by, that he finds comfort in. So he immediately starts trying to keep the fire alive, and he inadvertently discovers the joy of cooking food to make it taste better. Though eventually he does leave the fire and discovers a hut, and he meets the first person since his creator ran from him. He turned on hearing the noise and perceiving me shrieked loudly, and quitting the hut ran across the fields with the speed of which his debilitated form hardly appeared capable. His appearance different from any I had ever before seen, and his flight somewhat surprised me. But I was enchanted by the appearance of the hut. Here the snow and rain could not penetrate. The ground was dry, and it presented to me then as exquisite and divine a retreat as pandemonium appeared to the demons of hell after their sufferings in the lake of fire. I greedily devoured the remnants of the shepherd's breakfast. The creature still does not fully comprehend his world, and is guided primarily by light and warmth. He follows the sun's rising and seeks shelter when the cold comes. He knows nothing. He is guided by light. We also see here more references to demons and how he relates to them. His meandering leads him to a cottage, specifically a cottage inhabited by 3 peaceful individuals: a son that we later learn is named Felix, a daughter named Agatha, and a father named Father, for the moment. The creature hides himself in a shed leaning against the cottage and discovers that the shared wall is actually a boarded-up window. Fortunately for the monster, he is able to observe them. Many of his observations are as follows. The young girl was occupied in arranging the cottage, but presently she took something out of a drawer, which employed her hands, and she sat down beside the old man, who, taking up an instrument, began to play, and to produce sounds sweeter than the voice of the thrush or the nightingale. It was a lovely sight, even to me, poor wretch, who had never beheld aught beautiful before. The silver hair and benevolent countenance of the aged cottager won my reverence, while the gentle manners of the girl enticed my love. Everything is beautiful to the creature. Everything is new and wonderful. Through his words, we see an infant learning about the world, discovering music, seeing the bond of family and love revealed. There's an innocence and purity to the monster's observations. But I must interrupt these musings of beauty. I must remind you, this is still a horror story. This is still a tale told by a child murderer. And still yet, I remind you, this is an 8-foot-tall cobbled corpse living just beyond their wall, watching them at all times. Mary Shelley was gifted with the ability to illustrate the beauty in the mundane and the grotesque. And this story strives to present the idea that beauty equals good. Yet here, we listen to the story of the creature. He is not beautiful. He is horrifying to behold. He is a lost corpse baby without a father, brother, or sister. What will lead to William's death? What will become of the cottagers? These are the questions the 1800 reader is asking as the creature's tale continues to unfold. The answers await us in chapter 12 through 16. next week. But until then, feel free to speculate in the comments. We'll be seeing the entirety of the monster's story and learn his request soon enough. Thank you for watching, and until next time, Carpe Diem.